What's going on, people, and welcome to Man Knows Football. You are here with myself, Guni, and I've got a very, very special guest on here, Mr. Rob Pratley. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you, Guni. And yourself?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I was actually quite excited about this interview today. Rob, if you don't know who he is, he's been on Twitter and he's been active on the spaces, and he's been very, very generous to us Chelsea fans. Has been giving us some just a bit of news on what's going on the transfer front. I have been listening to you on the spaces with Con and a few others. You speak very well, speak very honestly as well. So we do. First thing I want to say to you is thank you very much, because you have been, giving us a lot of information. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Yeah, no, very happy to do it. Again, I'm always happy to give up my time and sort of discuss it with like-minded fans. I just ask that people remain respectful. I can't promise that all the time I'm going to say what people want to hear because of the nature of our transfers work, but I will always be honest. And again, I stick to three sort of core principles on all of my discussions. If there's no news, I won't invent something just to have news. I will stay quiet. And if people, don't like that, I appreciate it's frustrating, but it is. Number two, if I don't know something, I won't just invent that I know an answer to it. If I don't know about it at first, but I ask someone, I probably will if it's something that does develop, like Mark Cucurella, for example, because I expect it to be quite, significant stuff. And then my third sort of one of them is that if I feel there's something that I have a personal opinion on, and that can potentially bias it, I'll make it very clear when something is my opinion as opposed to news.
No, we appreciate that, man, because it just goes to show that you are being very honest, being very genuine as well. And that's really the best way to approach things. Honesty is the best policy. And those who understand the transfer window and how transfers work will understand that transfers often, the flip of a head, things can change very dramatically. And especially at Chelsea, we've seen certain instances work in our favor. I mean, going back all the way to John Obi Mikel to Willian, those look like dead certs. Mikel was in a Manchester United shirt. Willian was literally, I think he was on his way to his medical for Tottenham. And we saw how both of those transfers turned out. So I always say to people, like, sometimes, people can be right about certain things, but again, they could be flipped over. But with the nature of transfers as well, and the way people love the club, it's a very emotional topic, which is why people get certain ways about it. But as long as you do your best to tell the truth, I'm sure the people will appreciate that. But lots to cover on the Chelsea front. I've got a few questions of my own. There's one player in particular that has been a hot topic of conversation, not just for footballing reasons, but apparently for contractual reasons over at Barcelona. That is Frenkie De Jong, player that I really, really admire. I think he's super talented. Do I think he is the answer at Chelsea Football Club right now? I think he's part of it. I think there still needs to be several things that need to be addressed. But do you know what's kind of going on with that Frenkie De Jong situation, and whether Chelsea have a real chance of getting the player, or it's just a lot of, because there's so many different conflicting stories?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting conundrum. I've been told all the way through this summer that De Jong primary decision is not to leave Barcelona. If he can avoid it, he won't, because his family are very settled there. He has a wife who I believe, she's extremely settled in Barcelona. And he also feels that finally Barcelona have developed a side that's good enough for him, and a side that, can make use of his talent. At the same time, Barcelona aren't necessarily determined to try and sell the player. However, they are acknowledging the fact that he's on extremely, extremely high wages caused by interesting contractual discussions. Let's go with that phraseology for the moment. And also the fact that they acknowledge that he is ultimately someone who they feel they could get big money for in this window. They know that there's a lot of interest in the player. There was always going to be interest from Ten Hag. There was always going to be interest from other clubs. Paris Saint-Germain have held interest, but I think they're going to, not get involved. They're looking at Fabian Ruiz instead. Bayern Munich have long-term interest in the player, and again, I suspect Matthias de Ligt would quite like that, as de Ligt has always wanted to play with De Jong again, and that was partly why Barcelona did explore de Ligt's situation this summer briefly, albeit before it became very, very clear that, their finances were going to be quite constrained or to use the phrase, should be quite constrained. Obviously, they've not turned out to be that way. But the De Jong situation, I think, now is coming to a head because I think in this week we have to see one form of a solution or another. I understand this, I'm not really going to get into the legal ramifications of what Barcelona are and aren't claiming. I'm not a fully trained lawyer. I'm not a contract lawyer. What I will say is that it's very convenient that this story about the contract came out and they allegedly sent this letter 24 hours after they agreed a fee with Manchester United. And they sort of sent this to De Jong. Now, Barcelona are claiming that even if they do these other economic changes and they pull all sorts of levers and they sell X and they do Y, they can still register all the players. At the moment, a lot of this is coming from Barcelona's side rather than from La Liga or De Jong's side. De Jong's side throughout this have all stayed very, very quiet. And it'd be interesting to see what Barcelona actually do say. I think Barcelona have now sold this fourth lever. They've activated the fourth lever. But it'll be very interesting to see what La Liga do say if they do reject Barcelona's request even after, you've got players allegedly cutting salaries. Now, Chelsea, from their perspective, have made it clear they will pay for Frenkie De Jong in terms of the transfer fee that's been agreed, which is around 80 million euros. And more importantly, they have said they'll do something about the owed wages that exist in this old contract. Right. However, they're not proposing, by my understanding, to pay all of it up in one go. They're proposing to pay a percentage of it and then tie a load of it to bonuses. And that's what they've been trying to do with a lot of contracts this summer. Sterling's contract, for example, a lot of that is bonus-oriented. Koulibaly's contract, he's not on a significantly high initial wage, but he has a lot of bonuses if the club achieve things. And that's where they're trying to drag the contracts more towards. There were a lot of players certainly towards the end of Marina Granovskaya's time as director. We'll use the phrase director of football. She wasn't really director of football as per se, but we'll use that phrase for convenience. There were a lot of players towards the end of that reign that ended up on significant high wages just as base wages and very little in the way of bonuses. And consequently, that makes it a lot harder to move players on. And as a result of that, it's become very, very hard for Chelsea to sell some of those players. However, I think they're now trying to move away in that other direction. And in terms of things like Chukwuemeka's contract, I understand Chukwuemeka's contract is potentially quite lucrative if he plays a lot, but it isn't necessarily as lucrative if he doesn't play as much. So it sort of offers you that opportunity security. In terms of where I think De Jong will happen, I think, as I said before, I think something can be done. And I want to make caveat to people because, again, I think people do get a bit confused. When I say something can be done, it doesn't mean something will get done.
Yeah.
In a transfer. It means that the situation is thus that either one of three things have happened. Number one, personal terms have been agreed. Number two, the club has made it very, very clear they're willing to make a bid that meets the player's valuation and thus go into discuss personal terms. Or number three, the player has made it very, very clear he'd like to leave and join Chelsea Football Club. That was the case with Koulibaly, which is why that got something can be done. Cucurella got one because it became very clear Chelsea were going to meet the fee and had also had a broad agreement on personal terms. And in terms of Raheem Sterling, that got it because, again, all of those stars aligned. At the moment with De Jong, I would say we've got one of the three elements for the something can be done. We're not at a point where, something is getting done, which is what I'd say is the next stage of it, is that Chelsea have agreed to meet the fee. But until De Jong actively makes it clear he will leave, Chelsea won't go in and make an offer, won't try to approach personal terms. They don't want to have a situation where the club player just says no again. I do understand that there was a conversation between Todd Bowley and De Jong last week, and that Bowley really pressed for De Jong and really made it clear he saw De Jong as a big part of the team.
Yeah.
And De Jong at the time said no. But I do understand that from Saturday there might have been a bit of a shifting of his stance and he may have started to change his mind, albeit there is still quite a way to go. And I think the fact that this, Barcelona's story has also come out, that will only push it one way or the other. I think there's probably three outcomes now in the De Jong situation. Number one, De Jong will join Chelsea. Number two, De Jong will end up renewing at Barcelona organically and probably with a pay cut. Number three, Barcelona and De Jong will end up in court. And if I was to guess at the moment, I think number three is quite likely because De Jong and his party continue to say, they're not budging. Barcelona say they've got this legal evidence. La Liga are not going to do anything until a court decision is made because they're not going to do anything that could be deemed unlawful or go to court of arbitration for sport over it. So I think we've reached that impasse. It'll be very interesting to see. I was told Fifth Pro are going to comment on the situation soon. It'll be very interesting to see what they say because it's just getting murkier and murkier with De Jong. And I kind of say to people that it's a bizarre one in that there's a player called Rob Enker who people may not be aware of, and I recommend if you get a chance, read his book, A Life Too Short, which was a guy who unfortunately was eventually driven to suicide despite being on the cusp of being a German international. And I have a feeling, I really hope De Jong has a very strong support network around him, because I have a feeling mentally it's going to be quite crushing what's going on. And I really hope that, a resolution is found that ultimately makes the player happy, whether it's staying at Barcelona or moving elsewhere. The player's welfare almost needs to be an important thing. We can't just treat players like robots.
No, I have to agree with you. And it is also important to state that, just because Chelsea are interested in De Jong, he's not the only player that's going through it. I hear that it's Clement Lenglet as well, and also Ter Stegen are going through something quite similar. That's what I've been reading so far. But if that's the case, I mean, it's quite rightly, like you said, you got to protect the player's mentality. That is absolute key. And, I don't really want to comment too much on it because, again, I'm not qualified to do so. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And there's so much of the paperwork that nobody outside of those parties are privy to. So we have to be very careful as to what we say about it. But, I mean, if rumors are to be believed, it is very concerning. And my thing is that although all of this is going on, I like to I like to be a realist about it. And I haven't seen much from the player to indicate that he does want to leave as of yet. And it is quite confusing to me, like the fact that he's going through all of this. I understand that there's 17 million left on the table. And, any person, whether you're a football player or not, that's a lot of money to just walk away from. So I get the reason why he's going to stay and fight for it. But surely if there is a solution elsewhere that Chelsea are offering, he should explore it, because it might be, it might be better for his career, and like you said, better for his mental, that he takes that offer and not have to go through all the court dates and all that, because it's just going to affect his football on the pitch, everything on the outside. But it's a complete mess at Barcelona. But look, I hope that situation can get sorted out for the player, whether he comes to Chelsea or not. Very good player, very talented player. On his day, I enjoy watching him play. Excellent ball carrier as well. Which brings me to a point. I mean, I didn't want to bring up the CDM role just yet. I wanted to bring it up later, but it just kind of ties into what I'm about to say. Because, we do play with this pivot. We play with the midfield 2 over at Chelsea. And I've seen a lot of people saying, "Oh, De Jong's the answer. De Jong's the answer." But I feel that we still lack that presence in that CDM position to really help Frenkie De Jong thrive. Because I do think if we do play a pivot of De Jong and Kovacic, when we're on the ball, it's great because they're both elite at carrying the ball forward. But when it's the other side of the game, when it's the defensive phase, I do think we might be left a bit vulnerable. Now, me saying that, has there been any indications? Have you heard anything of Thomas Tuchel sort of looking at a CDM potentially to step in? Or are rumors to be believed that he is hell-bent on trying to sign Declan Rice, whether it's this summer, which I think is a very, very small possibility, or if it's the next summer?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's a real interest in Declan Rice at the club. I mean, I think the club would like to, regardless of whatever happens with Frenkie De Jong and regardless of what happens with other midfielders, they would like to try and bring in one of Jude Bellingham or Declan Rice in the sort of medium term. It's become quite clear that they sort of view a need to restructure the midfield. They need longer term options in the midfield, and both Jorginho and Kante are over 30 now. Neither of them are long term solutions. Both of them only have 1 year left on their contract. I see someone there just saying Laporta would like to have Frenkie in the team whilst adjusting his contract. Laporta will say at the time whatever he thinks in public people want to hear. I would, everything Joan Laporta says, just ignore it, because he's a politician. He's a trade politician. All he will do is just say whatever he thinks, people want to hear at the time, or whatever he thinks, Barcelona fans will want to hear to get him re-elected. La Liga, if they reject that solution, it's irrelevant what Laporta wants. I would also say what Laporta might like is going to be different to what Xavi wants as well, I imagine. Because Xavi the other day said that he, doesn't really know what's going to happen with De Jong, and honestly, it's sort of, his response was very different to that of what Laporta would like.
Yeah.
Again, this thing about the adjusting his contract, that seems to be the big sticking point, is that clearly they don't want to adjust it from De Jong's point of view. And I suspect if they try and take this situation to court and try and prove these contracts unlawful, it's just going to end up in a very long, messy situation. Going back to the DM sort of point, I think the club are at a bit of a crossroads in this regard, in that they know both. I think one of Kante or Jorginho will get a renewal. I'm not sure which one, but I think one of them will get a renewal.
Yeah.
I think at the moment it's more likely to be N'Golo Conte because he's viewed more as the high-profile value target for Tuchel. But at the same time, I think Jorginho has proven to Tuchel that he is someone he can trust and someone who he does like. That said, I just think Jorginho is more likely to still go this window because I think eventually Juventus might make some sort of offer, especially if Chelsea do bring in De Jong or someone else in the midfield. The big issue Chelsea do have at this moment in time is they need to move people out of the... Someone says Laporta isn't a politician, he's a lawyer. He's a lawyer by trade. He's currently club president. He's a politician. It goes to... It goes to the point that Chelsea need to sort of move players out before they can bring players in. I've talked quite a lot about this log jam, and we're starting to see it being, affected and starting to see it being shifted. Certainly from a defensive point of view, the club want to move on. They know Marcus Alonso's going. They want Emerson to go. They want their Malang Sarr is almost done. Levi Colwill has gone out on loan. The log jam is starting to clear from a defensive point of view, and ideally they'd like to bring in at least one centre back. I think it's more likely one at the moment, and then maybe a versatile right wing back if they can get the funds for it. Although as Azpilicueta renewing possibly alleviates some of that, desire to bring in the wing back this window. And the club are also aware they've got the buyback clause on Tino Livramento.
Yes.
And I think it's important not to lose sight of that. From the midfield perspective, Gilmour, I think, is going to leave. I'm not sure where he's going to go, but he's made it clear he wants to, have stability in his career. I do understand that. I was a little surprised that Everton went ahead and agreed their deal to sign Cody on loan because it uses up all of their loan spots now at the club. Yeah. And they were very keen on bringing Gilmour in, so maybe they'll look for a more permanent deal. It seems like one of those situations where I think that certainly a deal for Frank Lampard would be something he would like to do, but I don't think that Chelsea will necessarily want to do a deal at that price. Now, Ruben Loftus-Cheek's the interesting one in that the club wouldn't be against moving Ruben Loftus-Cheek on, although he is seen as a versatile option who can play across the midfield and at wing back, and so that sort of does save him a little bit. The club aren't against listening to proposals, listening to offers. I think an offer might come in for him towards the end of the window from someone. I don't know if it would be a permanent move or a loan deal, but I think at the moment he's going to block it. If Chelsea start getting more midfielders in, then that's when he'll start considering his sort of situation. He's at a point now where he needs to be playing regular sort of minutes. The same situation sort of might have happened with Conor Gallagher, in that Gallagher has already rejected a chance to talk to other clubs. He's rejected the chance to talk to Crystal Palace on a more permanent deal. He's rejected the chance for a West Ham loan deal. He's rejected Newcastle, who asked for a loan deal. And he wants to really make it at Chelsea. He's really, really keen on making it at Chelsea. But I think if more midfielders come in, he might also start considering his future. That said, there is the long-term thinking. The club might be, trying to persuade him and saying, look, we'll give you limited minutes this year, but next summer, at least 2 midfielders are going. There's going to be space for you. Now, the club do have some interest in other players. Mateus Nunes is one of them. They've been offered Sergio Milinkovic-Savic, although he's very, very expensive. Mm-hmm. And there is interest in some other sort of lesser names. There's been interest before in Leandro Paredes, although I think that's probably gone. The club did briefly consider Adrien Rabiot, but thankfully they came to their senses and moved away from that. It's quite clear that I think Chelsea would like to do something in the midfield before the end of the window. In terms of actual CDMs, I try not to view people as CDMs specifically. I view people as more of a sort of versatile role. Tuchel himself would like to be able to move the formation about a bit. He would like to be able to play things. He would like to be able to play something other than the 3-4-3. But at the moment, he doesn't feel like the club has the facility and the squad to do that. And it was quite interesting to see some of the talks that people sort of said about bringing in quality, but also in the right positions and bringing in the right frame and role of player. And I think in the longer term, Tuchel would like to move to the 3-4-3-3 in order to make the most of Gallagher and possibly Mount in that sort of double 8 role. Yeah. But at the moment, until they have that proper defensive midfielder in, it won't happen. The interesting name, I don't think will happen this window, but it was certainly someone they did consider, was Ibrahim Sangare from PSV. The club did scout him a lot, and along with a lot of other clubs, they did scout him. He did have a release clause in his old contract. I believe that's now at least doubled or possibly gone with his new contract he's recently signed. But it wouldn't necessarily still surprise me if someone did try and move him out of the club, even if they paid a lot of money for him.
I mean, there have been instances in the past where players do renew their contracts as a favor to their club so they can perhaps get a little bit more, you know, just to show respect for the faith that they've given them. So this is why when I saw it, right, and this is nothing but just purely my opinion and my instinct, I felt it was very much similar to that because, you know, I think 40 million for a player like that in euros as well is a bit cheap, especially considering that, you know, the scarcity of quality of CDMs that's around at the minute. Well, certainly ones that are available. So I wouldn't necessarily, in my opinion, think I actually think that about 60 to 70 million euros, although it is quite expensive, might be something that could tempt PSV into selling the player. But it's just whether Chelsea is going to want to do it this summer, like you said. But a couple of interesting things that you did say there. And we were told from the beginning of the transfer window that it's a lot of incomings are going to depend on outgoings. Now, Timo Werner going out of the door, that frees up a lot of wages because he was on between 270. I think it was between 270 and 280k or something like that, around that figure. That's a lot. Obviously, Marcos Alonso as well will be going over to Barcelona, so it's looking. And there's one or two others as well, but that to me was just as important as the incomings, because like you said, the previous regime, they made a mess with some of the wages in terms of contracts, and it's left us in a situation where we're stuck with deadwood. I mean, even to this day, look, we still got Batshuayi on the books, we've got Baba Rahman on the books, we've got several players that are not really realistically going to be playing for Chelsea Football Club. And it's just down to the contract situation that's happened in the previous regime. So, but so far, I can't deny. I'll say this: so far, with the outgoings that are leaving and that are due to be leaving, I think Todd Bowley's done a good job, because one thing that Chelsea fans were screaming for was like, Marina, cut your losses. Cut your losses. We know that you spent X amount of money on this, but like, if you're going to hold on to that, it's going to be at the detriment of the club. Sometimes you're just going to have to cut your losses and let go of certain players that just didn't work. And Todd Bowley recognized that by allowing Romelu Lukaku to leave, because that was a huge outlay for the club, as everybody knows. So for him to come in and make that his first move out of the door, I think that was a huge statement, and that went down very well with me, in my opinion. But in terms of Loftus-Cheek, I did hear the same thing like you were saying. Ideally, he does not want to leave the club. He wants to try and, you know, solidify his place at Chelsea. And why shouldn't he? Cobham boy has loved the club, was given faith under Sarri, and I thought he was brilliant under Sarri until he got the Achilles injury, which is one of the worst injuries that you can get in the sport. And I'd just like to emphasize that to people. So, you know, even Chelsea, knowing that, they could have easily just cut their losses with him at that point. But still, they allowed him to rehab. They allowed him to get back to fitness. And now he is playing games, whether it's to the standard that he was before. Me personally, I think it's dipped. It might need some time for him to get back, because it's not just a physical thing that he has to get over. It's also psychological as well. And another young player who unfortunately sustained such an injury is Callum Hudson-Odoi. Now, we are getting rumours that there are a lot of clubs that are interested in the young man to be playing for them. But where do you think is most likely Callum will be going? Have you heard if there's any favourite destinations for him?
I know Southampton are very, very keen. Like they're very keen on the player, and they're also pointing to the fact that they did, as they view, a good job with Armando Broja last year. The reason why Chelsea may not be as keen on this is that last year they were unhappy at how Southampton behaved towards Broja, particularly during the January transfer window, and the fact they felt that there was an attempt to tap up the player during the window, which wasn't, you know, ever part of the loan deal. Leicester have a level of interest in the player. They do have significant, you know, they have had significant interest in the past. I don't know how much strong it is now, but it's possible they might look to do something, because they've got Harvey Barnes, who's now injured for a while, and they're also struggling with other attacking targets.
Yeah.
Someone say about Leroy Sané links. I I would be very, 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 very surprised if Leroy Sané is playing for Chelsea Football Club. He was someone who Tuchel really does like, and Chelsea did have a chance to do something maybe last summer, but this summer, the ship sailed. He was, by his agent's view, Fal Ramdani, he was at least available at one point earlier this summer. However, I think that was more a case of his agent making him available rather than the club, expressly making him available. And another club that did ask about him specifically were told, he's not for sale when they approached Bayern. If, maybe he doesn't play as much in the next 12 months, maybe, but it is getting to that point now with Sané where he's no longer a young sort of, star. He got to now be starting towards, I think he's got 25, sort of 26 now. He's got to start to be a finished article. And people are sort of, starting to expect that. And he'll turn 27 in January. You're starting to now expect that finished article and that world-class player. Someone asking about Federico Chiesa, nothing will happen this window. Maybe there's still interest in the club, but it depends on how his ACL injury recovers.
Exactly.
It's also very rare that top Italian players leave the Italian league and leave Juventus just due to the nature of how Juventus, they have the significant advantage of tax breaks and they can offer significant wages to the top Italian players.
Yeah, because with Chiesa, certainly pre-injury, I was a huge fan of him. Mm-hmm. And, the nature of an injury like that, you also have to be patient. You got to see how the player recovers because there's no guarantee that you're going to get the same player back. There's those injuries are serious. Although technology now is a lot better than it was. I mean, medicine's a lot better than it was, perhaps 20 or so years ago. And, the ligament injuries in the knees can be, they're more times than none, often very successful. But there's still the mental aspect that players must get over, and because that can play a part. Like, for example, things like, explosiveness and, going in for 50-50s. These things, might play in the back of the player's mind. But Chiesa, I would say, just if Chelsea are interested, I'd understand if they weren't going to go for him this summer. Just want to see his recovery. Also similar with Tino Livramento, who suffered a very similar injury. Yeah. He's still currently injured. He's not fit enough to be playing just yet. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. But that's before I get onto the Wesley Fofana, because I think the Tino Livramento situation is interesting because I heard, and whether this is correct or not, that he wanted to initially leave because he felt that he was good enough to start, but recognized that Reece James was always going to be ahead of him in the pecking order, which is something that I don't necessarily agree with. So if we were to go back in for him, perhaps like next summer, do you see that stance changing at all?
I would first clarify that isn't quite right. Livramento left because he felt there wasn't a pathway at the club. And he felt there wasn't a pathway for a variety of reasons. Number one, he didn't actually make his first team debut. He didn't really get a first team debut. He only got on the bench a couple of times. Number two, the club ideally wanted him to sign a deal and go out on loan for several seasons. Yeah. He felt he was good enough for Premier League football immediately, and it's proven he was right.
Yep.
And number three, this is sort of a less of a sort of point of it, but there were sort of difficulties between him and his agent. His agent and the club fell into difficulties around the renegotiation for the contract because they felt they were getting lowballed, and they felt they weren't being sufficiently compensated for their work in it. Let's go with that phraseology.
Yeah.
My opinion of agents is one of those things that that's better saved to private DMs. But I think that it's sort of worth noting that he himself, again, with any buyback clause in a deal, both the clubs but also the player in question has to agree to the buyback clause. And I'm told that Livramento was quite keen to have the buyback clause in place. I've been told that by a couple of people that Livramento was very, very keen on the buyback clause being in place because it meant that he would eventually have the chance. He is a Chelsea fan. His family are Chelsea fans, and I think he would like to return if the situation was right and the situation was plausible. However, I don't think anything will happen if we do sign a right wing back this window. If we don't, and there's no right wing back, I think the club will look at bringing Livramento in. There's also a feeling internally that if they continue playing the three, Reece James can also play on the right hand side of the three, and so you potentially have Livramento and James playing at the same time, and then on the other side, Cucurella and Chilwell playing to offer that extra bonus attack from that overlapping centre-back and that extra bonus ability from the overlapping centre-back. But it's one of those situations where at the minute I think Livramento, the club just want to wait and see. First and foremost, he needs to get back to full fitness, and that's the most important thing for the players now, to get back to full fitness.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And to me, that's actually very encouraging to hear that he was the one that insisted on, having that buyback clause, because honestly, with what I was hearing, I thought that was going to be dead and buried. I was hearing from several other places that his preference would be to Man City, and that would have hurt me, honestly, because I'm a huge fan of Tino Livramento. So the fact that, the possibility is still there is very encouraging to me. Now, the reason why because I know I've seen Wesley Fofana, is that I did want to wait for a couple of more people to jump in the room before I was to ask this question, because this is another huge topic that I feel that it's been brought to the forefront, but it's not really like been massively at the forefront like certain other transfers. So in terms of Wesley Fofana, if rumors are to be believed, we have made 2 bids. Obviously, the opening bid is never going to be accepted. That's just how it is in football. It's just really to let the clubs know, okay, we're ready to start negotiations. We're going to start here. What are you saying? Sort of thing. It's sort of like badminton, back and forth, but in a good way. So, could you talk us through what you know about the Wesley Fofana situation?
Yeah, sure. So basically, with Fofana, the club have held long-term interest in him. Like, this is not new interest. They had interest in him when he was at Saint-Etienne. They've had interest in him at Leicester. However, the injury last year obviously put the kibosh on any transfer. And then the club didn't expect him to be available this summer because he signed that new deal. Yeah. Now, I think if he hadn't signed a new deal back in March, both Chelsea and probably Manchester United both would have been very, very interested. There's interest in Real Madrid as well. Newcastle have held interest with their new megabucks. There's a lot of clubs that have interest in Wesley Fofana. PSG have a level of interest in him as well. Inter Milan view him as a potential replacement for someone else who didn't leave this window and hasn't yet. So it's worth sort of noting that the interest is not new interest. I would ignore people reporting anything about fees or whatever for Fofana, because ultimately at this moment in time, Chelsea, from what I understand, prepared to pay whatever is needed to make it happen. I have a lot of respect for Nazar, but I think he might be wrong in that regard. Okay. A lot of that felt like conjecture and opinion in the article, rather than just the fact that clubs receive criticism for Harry Maguire. It seems to be a way to get Manchester United into the piece, in all honesty. But Chelsea are a third bid is imminent. I don't know if it's happened yet. As of about 10 o'clock this morning, it hadn't happened, but I don't know if it's happened subsequently since then. The club believe that this bid will be the one that will make it happen. Now, whether Leicester take that stance or not is another matter, but the club believe this is at the sufficient value of what they've been quoted by Leicester and what Leicester have always maintained all the way along to make it happen. Fofana wants the move to happen. He's made it quite clear on his social media accounts that he is keen on the move. I'm told internally he's keen on it. Again, someone said the third bid has happened. Again, I work with Si, but I haven't had a chance to speak to Si this morning. I do actually have a job outside of this as well.
By the way, sorry to cut you off. Simon Phillips is a top man. I've been speaking to him off camera as well on WhatsApp. That guy is one of the most humble, most nicest guys that I've ever had the pleasure of speaking to. Just had to throw that one in there. Simon's one of our own. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I agree. Again, there's a reason why I do work with Si's team, and it's not due to the fact that I want to get the clout or anything. It's the fact that I do know Si's a really genuine guy, and I know that what we discuss and what we talk about is genuine stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, Si says the third bid has happened. I personally haven't been told that yet from my sources, but again, Si and I do have different sources, so it is possible. I've been told that it was imminent as of yesterday, and at the end of the day, it sort of isn't really a matter. It doesn't really matter when the bid goes in; it's whether the bid is accepted or not. Is the only real relevant sort of thing in this equation. Fofana himself would like the move to happen. Someone asked if PSG are in for Fofana. They won't pay the fee. They like Fofana, but they won't pay the asking price. They're balking at the asking price for Milan Skriniar. They won't pay the money that Leicester want for Fofana, which, for argument's sake, is, let's just say, a deal around £80 million. I think would get something done. If that's put on the table, maybe if that's 75 million up in guaranteed costs, plus maybe 5 million, 10 million in bonuses. But it's very clear that Chelsea aren't going to give up on this one, and unless he's, absolutely, I think, priced out, unless the fee goes up to over 100 million, I think Chelsea will pay it. I think they will just go ahead and pay it, and that's more of a sort of opinion-based thing. I think Leicester, people talk about 75 million for Hudson-Odoi. I don't think there will be any other deals tied into it. I don't think it will be situations where bids get tied in. It will be a case that if a transfer happens, a bit like with this De Jong, Alonso stuff that people are going on about, no deals will be tied together because clubs don't do that. It just makes it more confusing and more difficult. But I think that it's sort of worth noting that from Chelsea's perspective, Fofana was very, very high up the list as far back as March when sanctions were ongoing. But the fact he signed a new deal meant that they thought it was dead in the water. Clearly, the amount of money that's been offered and the stance of the player has possibly shifted that situation. And so that's why the transfer might be possible.
I do understand that from Leicester's perspective as well, that they do need to get some sales done. Now, whether that's going to be Fofana, whether that's going to be Tielemans, or whether it's going to be James Maddison, who I think I don't see them selling 2 out of the 3 of them, or certainly not 3 out of the 3 of them. So if this, for example, as rumored, James Maddison has been linked to Newcastle, Tielemans has also been linked to Arsenal. Now, I do understand that they're all in different positions.
Yeah.
But do you think that will affect the probability of Fofana leaving the club now that they've got some money from elsewhere?
I wouldn't try and conflate it. Firstly, I'd take Tielemans completely out of the equation. Tielemans is going to be sold regardless of what happens with Fofana or Maddison, because Tielemans has made it very, very clear he won't renew. He's out of contract next summer. The club don't want to lose him on a free. I think there's potential good value deal for someone. I'm told from someone internally, Leicester are not against playing hardball and just keeping him until his contract expires, due to sort of the nature of his contract. It's worth, I think, noting that from Maddison, Leicester's valuation of Maddison is a lot higher than what Newcastle have bid so far, and indeed look likely to bid. And I was told by someone that they thought the more likely scenario was that Maddison would end up renewing his deal at Leicester. Leicester are keen on trying to stress to James Maddison he needs to be playing week in, week out in a sort of stable team to have a chance of getting into the England squad. He's in a very competitive position, the sort of position that, it's not easy to get into, and once you are in the squad, it's very easy to get out of, as some other players are finding. And so I think it's more likely at the moment that they do, if they do sell someone, it'll be Fofana. Brendan Rodgers ideally doesn't want him to be sold, but again, I try and ignore what managers say in public during the transfer window, because ultimately their opinion and what the board think are usually 2 very different things. And indeed, that has been the case in a lot of cases at Chelsea. What the board have done is not necessarily what the manager would have liked.
Yeah.
I think it's worth sort of noting that Fofana himself, if he, goes in and publicly requests the move, I think that would speed things up a lot.
My opinion, do you think it will have to come down to that? Or do you think, the 80 million quoted will be enough for Leicester to just accept it? Because, the player probably has, quite right, like you said, through his social medias has kind of expressed that he would want the move to happen. So I'm pretty sure behind closed doors, a conversation has taken place. But do you think it would have to go that far as much as a transfer request for the player to leave?
Potentially. Leicester aren't very keen on selling players, but they do like blocking. They do like blocking, players leaving not on their terms. They were very, very stung when they were very, very stung when Kante was sold.
Yeah.
Because of that being a release clause, and so subsequently they've tried to avoid ever having release clauses in their players' contracts because they know how quickly people can, just break them. Now, I think it is worth sort of noting that Leicester, with their own financial issues, they want to try and bring players in this window. They still want to do business. But at this moment in time, they're hamstrung and they can't. And as a result of that, as long as that impasse sort of happens and until they start moving players in and out, there's always going to be that question of who's going to get sold. And I think that's what Chelsea are looking to take advantage of.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, until, unless Leicester starts to soften in private, in which case we don't know, then I think it's going to be difficult unless the player actively looks to leave. But then again, he hasn't been against it before. I mean, he did the same thing at Saint Etienne when he wanted to move to Leicester. So, it's possible it might happen.
Yeah, that is correct. He did, sort of put his foot down at Saint Etienne and sort of forced their hand in accepting the move. I would be, although me personally, regardless of how much I want Fofana at Chelsea Football Club, I wouldn't like that if he did it to Leicester, especially considering what he went through in terms of injury. And again, the club putting their faith in him, because what people don't realize is that a lot of money and investment goes into these players during these injuries too. So there is a lot of belief on their behalf, to the player. So for me, it wouldn't be nice if Fofana was to force that move in a similar way as he did over in Saint Etienne. But I want to move away from the defensive positions. We have spoken briefly about, wing back cover. We've spoken about centre backs. We've even spoken about CDMs, people, and Frenkie De Jong has been discussed, because I do see quite a few people saying Frenkie De Jong update. Just go back earlier in the video and you'll hear what we said about Frenkie De Jong. But we're going to move forward onto the more advanced positions, the attacking positions. And thank you, Velan, for this super chat. Let's get onto Nkunku, because I do believe that he signed, I know he signed a new contract with RB Leipzig. But is it true that there is a release clause next summer for the player of around 60 million euros that's been touted?
Yeah, that's correct.
Are Chelsea taking that into consideration?
I wouldn't necessarily say they're directly taking it into consideration. They do have interest in the player. They did like him, but it became very, very clear this summer that Leipzig weren't going to sell Nkunku. Leipzig tend to try and, with their business structure, try and work on one big sale a sort of season, or one big sale every couple of years. They were expecting this summer's one to be Konrad Laimer. However, Bayern Munich's interest in Laimer has sort of, reached a bit of an impasse in that they won't pay what RB Leipzig would like for the player. They're lowballing, and at the moment, I think Laimer's most likely going to stay unless someone else comes in and they're aware they can get him on a free transfer next season. Now, there's obviously also been the signing. I think Angelino also leaving on a loan to buy. That's which should be referenced. Or David Raum's coming sort of to replace him. Now, it is worth sort of noting that from RB Leipzig's sort of perspective, they knew Nkunku sort of was keen on going this summer, and they knew there was potentially likely to be something, quite a lot of bids going in for him with his contract being up next year. However, they've instead agreed the new deal with him on increased terms and increased money in order to get that release clause in as sort of a bit of a compromise. And this is like what they did with Timo Werner. I think it's worth sort of, noting that this sort of deal for Nkunku is, nothing is done at this moment in time. Nkunku will have his, absolute pick of players, his absolute pick of clubs next season. But Chelsea do have a long-term interest in him, so do Manchester City, so do Manchester United, so do Paris Saint-Germain, ironically where he came from. One thing that is to be noted with Nkunku is that Tuchel and Nkunku have quite a checkered relationship. Tuchel always thought the player was very, very talented at PSG, but felt he didn't show it enough. And ultimately, that was partly what led to him leaving PSG. However, at the same time, Tuchel also wanted to ensure that PSG didn't sell him. And that was part of where the actual relationship between Tuchel and PSG started to break down, is the fact they sold a lot of young talents and a lot of young players who they didn't want to, keep.
It wouldn't be the first time. Leonardo is notorious for, having disagreements with managers. And I actually think that it's a very good thing for PSG that they signed Luis Campos. I got confused with the player. Luis Campos is somebody that I've admired for a long time. The work that he's done at Lille, the work that, in several other clubs that he's worked at as well. Has a very, very good eye for talent, him. So I was kind of sad to see him go to PSG, because in the past we had been linked with him. I remember there was a point where he done this presentation for Chelsea, and I'm not sure what even happened after that. Whether it just went dead or Chelsea just flat out rejected him. But yeah, that's PSG anyway. So interesting with Nkunku. I didn't know that Tuchel really wanted to keep him at PSG. So yeah, that's interesting. Hopefully, we can see a move being made next summer, but still that's a long time away. Anything can happen between now and then. Things drastically change. But Also, as well, there have been rumours of Wilfred Zaha to Chelsea Football Club. Now that's been hotting up over the past couple of days, and I don't know too much about it. I've been asked by quite a few of my subscribers, and quite like you, I'm very honest. What I don't know, I'm not going to pretend that I know. But have you heard anything in terms of Wilfred Zaha, or how serious that interest is from Chelsea's side?
I mean, I can give very limited. Again, Zaha's not something I know a lot about, but I can give the limited information that I do know on it. His agent is keen on him trying to leave. His agent is keen on him sort of, taking that step up back to Champions League football. Zaha is not actively looking to leave Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace is not actively looking to sell him. There are people that feel that, Zaha would be available at the right price, and if the club made a sufficient bid. But at this moment in time, no one really knows what that is. Certainly from Palace's perspective, they do have replacements in the longer term in mind for Zaha in sort of, the medium to longer term. However, at this moment in time, no offer has been made, and I think it's, just been sort of scouted as per se. It would be quite interesting in that it would be another player that Chelsea are signing very much while the player's in their prime, rather than, outside of it.
Okay, interesting. So again, it's more tentative interest than something that's concrete then.
So certainly from my understanding at this moment in time, although again, like I confess, Zaha's only one I've heard about in sort of the last 24, 48 hours. So there may be, more to it than meets the eye.
Vilan, we're gonna come on to the DOF because we don't. I'm trying to respect the time that Rob has. We've got about 15 minutes or so, and there are a couple of other players I want to discuss before we get to that. But definitely a very, very good question, that one there. So we're going back to that club over in Barcelona again, and this time Aubameyang and Depay apparently could be available this summer. Thomas Tuchel, as we know, has worked closely with Aubameyang during his time at Borussia Dortmund. And there was a tweet I was reading somewhere that he does believe he can get the most out of him over at Chelsea Football Club due to their previous relationship. But there's also Memphis Depay who's trying to make himself a free agent. Well, I don't know if it's already happened by now, but I certainly hear the rumors that they're in negotiations of him sort of cutting ties with Barcelona. But which out of the two, which do you see more likely, if there is even concrete interest in any of the two players, to happen?
There is certainly concrete interest in Aubameyang. I'm not so much about Depay. I don't know if either of them are really likely, in all honesty. Aubameyang was someone who Chelsea did like and did have interest in beforehand. But it's a situation of that when he left Arsenal, it was very clear he only wanted to go to Barcelona and they only wanted to make stuff done. And they only wanted to get things done. He's on significant wages at Barcelona, so that may be a reason why Barcelona are keen to get him off the wage bill. The same is true of Depay. Depay is on very high wages at Barcelona. It is probably worth noting that Tuchel would have liked if Aubameyang did come in, it would be very much a Tuchel pick because the club want to focus on Havertz and Broja and potentially trying to bring in another centre forward style player, but not someone in the mould of an Aubameyang who's more of a poacher sort of finisher. They want to bring in someone who's more of a sort of all-round centre forward. And even then, I doubt that'll happen this window because the money isn't there at this moment in time unless significant sales happen or other plans change or things, things get done. I think it's worth sort of saying that Depay, from what I understand with Barcelona's perspective, they will let him go on the caveat that he confirmed which club he's joining and also that they agree to take full responsibility for basically everything, paying for the transfer fee, paying for the sort of, new contract. Barcelona will let him go and basically make him a free agent again, and then it will be up to him to sign on a deal. But Barcelona want the assurances the deal is in place so that they don't have any, funny business sort of happening. Depay has been offered to Chelsea this summer. I'm not going to pretend he hasn't, but he's been offered all the way around Europe to a lot of clubs. Do I think he's really a solution? Not really. I think Depay struggled last time he was in England. I think he did very well in France, but again, there was a lot of space in France. He's not really pulled up trees at Barcelona, albeit in a shifting environment in the team. And I think Juventus are the team I was told that are most keen on him. They're the one most likely to put forward a proposal, and I think it would probably suit him to go somewhere like Juventus. Again, the Italian league is a slower paced league. He will get his significant tax breaks for his wages that he wants. I think, it'll make suit the player quite well.
No, I think he does well in Serie A as well. Honestly, like for all the reasons that you said, and I also think he'll be quite entertaining to watch over there. I think we're going to see a lot of his flair come back, and purely because of the space given and the one-on-ones that he's going to be getting, because the press isn't as intense over there as it is in, let's say, in England or wherever. So you're right on that, but it's interesting. Aubameyang. Now, this is the thing is, I see our fan base is sort of in like two camps. Don't bring him, and yeah, bring him. You see, my thing with Aubameyang is the fact that we have two young strikers in the club. One is not even technically a striker in Kai Havertz, but he can play the false nine role good on his day. And Broya, as we know, natural striker, but still very, very young. We don't have that Oli Giroud anymore, that senior figure to sort of, give them that guidance as to, positioning and perhaps in Kai Havertz's case, finishing, because that's something that I definitely have a gripe on. His strike on the ball, sometimes lets him down. He does like to caress it rather than put power behind the ball at times. Something that should be really obvious, but people be surprised. Like when people build habits in their mind, they're very difficult to break. And it might be the case with Kai Havertz. So in terms of having that senior experience to pass on the knowledge to the younger players, I am very much a fan of that, especially in the striker position. But we will get on to this question, and this will be the final question because I also have another stream that I have to do in about 15 minutes myself with troops and back again. But the DOF candidates. Now, I know there has been two that Chelsea are really, really interested in, and that is Michael Edwards and Paul Mitchell. By the way, I had an absolute stinker once. I called Paul Mitchell Phil Mitchell by mistake, and they've never been able to let it go ever since. But Paul Mitchell being one of them, and I hear the outside chances are Andrea Berta and I think it's Leonardo. It's not Leonardo. Maxwell. From PSG as well. But on the first two, what are the stance on them?
So the club have, and again, this was one of my personal exclusives. The club did approach Michael Edwards very, very quickly after the new owners came in. They really like what he's done at Liverpool. They've had conversations with him through their work with the LA Dodgers and through general meetings of minds. They've had conversations while he's been at Liverpool and discussed his work effectively. Edwards is viewed by a lot of people as sort of the man who revolutionised a lot of Liverpool scouting and transfer mechanisms and developed a lot of the backroom stuff that now has put the position in place for the new sort of ownership and for FSG, but also for his successor, and have a successor plan in place. Now, Chelsea would really like to bring Michael Edwards in. And they've made a very, very good proposal to him, at least a sort of verbal proposal. Edwards himself is keen on the proposal, but the big caveat is that he wants to take a break from football. And he has said to Chelsea that I will come as long as you let me take my break. Chelsea ideally want someone in for the January transfer window, and they want someone in to be able to plan not as much for January, but more for next summer, to be able to do quite a lot next summer and to be able to recruit quite smartly next summer. Now, I think it's worth sort of noting that I think Michael Edwards is the club's preferred choice. But it would be interesting to see if they do wait around for him, because I think they've also got other candidates who are aptly very able. Paul Mitchell has certainly made it very, very clear that if the opportunity did come back to England and come back to London, he would jump at it. And he is someone who has impressed the club a lot with his work at Monaco, not so much his work at Tottenham, although some of his work behind the scenes at Tottenham was very well regarded. And crucially, he also has... I think been given a lot of credit by other people at the club. Have also come out and said he's very well regarded, who they've been in conversation with, and they've spoken to third-party advisors. Maxwell is very much a Tuchel pick in that when Maxwell was at PSG, Tuchel was happy, and it was when Maxwell left PSG that the relationship with Tuchel started to unravel. However, I think Maxwell is less likely than either of the other two. Andrea Berta, I don't think he wants to leave Spain. I think he's very, settled at Atletico Madrid, and I don't think Atletico are keen on directly moving him on. Again, they're a club where their internal structure very rarely shifts, and when it does shift, it's more of a case that the manager will go, all of the staff will go, and they will start again from ground zero.
Yeah.
Someone says in interviews, that Chelsea's pushing to sign him. If that is the case, and again, I don't know. I don't comment on other sources. I don't comment on other sources. It's always been one of my things. It's people's other news, not mine. Is that if that is true, it's very much a Tuchel pick. It's very much Tuchel getting what he wants because Tuchel really wants the guy. Someone asked why we couldn't get Edwards in and let him rest till next summer. The club wants someone in place for the January window because they want to be able to have the facility to do stuff in January. There is a couple of interesting deals that they may explore in January relating to players that are out of contract next summer at this moment in time, and indeed other outgoings that they want to try and sort out. So I think it's worth noting that it's more of a case that the club want Edwards, but they won't wait for Edwards.
Okay, so if they don't wait for Edwards, it's looking like Paul Mitchell might be the other
Paul
thing.
Mitchell is, I think, probably the next most likely candidate, although there are some other names that are further down the list and potentially they will be explored, though at the moment I don't think it's really important to get into that too much.
I'll be honest with you. I'd be over the moon with either Michael Edwards or Paul Mitchell. I'm a big fan of the two, big fan of both of them, in my opinion. So Gerard Romero says Bernardo Silva operation will be between 50 to 55 million euros, which is dirt cheap for a player of that quality when you really think about it.
I would wait and see what or actual fee gets reported.
Yeah.
Often you found with him there have been fees reported by Gerard Romero that have turned out to be quite far away from.
I can't imagine. And this, we're talking about one of Manchester City's best players as well. He is a top quality player. And I've seen quite a few fans on social. Why don't Chelsea go for Bernardo Silva? Manchester City would be mad to let him join our club. It has to be abroad or nothing. That's how I think they're looking at it. He's a top prospect. But listen, I think that's about it, people. I do see one or two other questions. Jay, okay, can we quickly just touch on Cesare
Casadei?
Yeah.
So yeah, Chelsea do like Cesare Casadei. Again, he's viewed as one who's a long-term option for the future. Very highly regarded in Italy. Several clubs have tried to incorporate him into deals Inter Milan are doing this summer. However, Inter Milan need to make a sale in order to balance their books a bit. They were banking on that big sale being Milan Skriniar, but at the moment Skriniar isn't happening, so they have to look elsewhere. And Cesare Casadei might well be one of them. Chelsea have made an offer for Casadei that was turned down. Inter Milan came back with an offer and said, we either want this and we want a buyback clause, or we want a slightly higher amount of money. I think it's now in a situation with Chukwuemeka signed, where Chelsea will spend a bit longer assessing Casadei and maybe make a move a bit later in the window. But the interest is still there. As to whether he'd stay at the club or whether he'd go out on loan in the first window, I don't know. He is someone who doesn't have any senior experience at this moment in time. So I think they probably want to try and get him out somewhere and get him first team football week in, week out. But he is someone who, is very well liked and is very much seen as one for the future, while they continue to invest not only in the first team, but also in the younger players with the signings of Slonina, Chukwuemeka, Omari Hutchinson, Zach Sturge, the interesting Ronnie Edwards that's been reported today. It's sort of a case of building the team for the future, so they don't need to do it at the time.
I definitely like that thinking as well, because a lot of us were fixated on for now senior targets, but equally as important is your future as well. And some of these targets that Chelsea are going for, no doubt they are in like the top echelons of their talent, for especially the players that I'm seeing that are being linked. But listen, I really appreciate you, Rob, for coming on today. You were very insightful, as always. I'm sure you answered quite a few burning questions. Well, you certainly answered burning questions that I had. Quite a few questions in the chat as well. Brilliant stuff, man. I've also got your Twitter link down there in the description. I've made it a clickable link as well. Yeah, so if you'd like to follow Rob on Twitter, he'll be down there. But is there any other social media platforms that you regularly feature on that you'd like to let the people know?
I'd also just like to put, again, I do write for Cy and Dan's sort of page, so at Cy and Dan Talk CFC. I
am subscribed to that. I've got a year subscription and I'm going to keep renewing that brilliant website. Go on.
And then also at my other two platforms, at the Chelsea Social and at the CFCW Social, they're my primary platforms that I sort of have ownership over. Lots of great sort of Chelsea content, articles, edits, just a really great bunch of people. And yeah, I'm really proud to be sort of one of the owners of that.
That's it. No, that's brilliant. And I'm definitely gonna, because I've missed those out after the video, I'm gonna put them in the description, people. So make sure you do circle back to the video, especially if you have missed the first 10 minutes or however much you've missed. There is a lot of stuff that, a lot of information that Rob has shared with us. And also as well, I'll be adding those extra socials down there in the description if you do want to give Rob a follow. But listen, man, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on here. I would love to have you again before the window closes sometimes. Obviously, I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask when the next available. We will definitely talk it up in the DMs, but it was brilliant to have you on, man. We really appreciate you over here.
Pleasure. Yeah, no, absolute pleasure. And yeah, happy to be on anytime.
And people, listen, to everybody that was in the comments, in the chat, giving your thoughts, asking the questions, thank you very much. As always, man, you lot are making this community a brilliant one. I love every single one of you. And I still maintain that we have the best community around, man. So people, listen, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, please make sure you stay safe. Peace out, people.